Hi, everyone, and welcome to If She Knew, a podcast where we talk about mental health, vulnerability, and all sorts of real life experiences that a lot of people go through, but we don't really talk about. So, as always, if you haven't already, go ahead and follow on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube under Tierney's Journey, which is at TIERNEYS Journey, as well as follow along for weekly episodes. I always like to say before we get into this that I am sharing my own experience and I am not a professional, so if you need professional help, please go see a provider or a therapist. So let's get into this week's episode. So, how is everybody doing this week? I hope everybody's doing well. I need to share my little milestone because I know this is probably going to sound not important to a lot of people, but when you struggle with anxiety and this has been an issue for you in the past and a hard thing to overcome, this is a big deal for me. I am officially at my job the longest I've been at a full-time job since graduating college. So because I quit 2 jobs in the past year and a half and took off work for about 4 months, but now since being in this job, I have officially surpassed any of the length of time I've been in any of those other jobs. So I've officially been in this job for the longest as a full-time job, which might not seem important to you, and I know 6 months isn't a long time, but to me, this is a long time, especially when I struggle with really bad anxiety and not being able to get through things or feeling very overwhelmed very easily. And I feel like I'm doing okay. I mean, this is definitely not my long term goal, but for the time being, it's doing what it needs to do for me. And that's great. And I'm very happy about that. So that was just a little update for you guys. I feel like I should get like a little cake for myself to celebrate because that's a big milestone for me. And I didn't know if I would be able to get there. So for me to get there in a full-time job that's Monday through Friday every single day is a big deal for me. But today's episode was not the original plan. Originally, we were supposed to have a guest on, but that kind of didn't work out. So today, you get me. You're welcome. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about guilt and blame and like blaming yourself for not having a relationship. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about with my dad, but this can apply to any kind of relationship that you have. And this is kind of a sensitive subject for me. I'm still getting into it with my therapist a lot, and I find it still very confusing and hard sometimes to figure out. So this is kind of just like an ongoing thing for me. So if I pause at all, I'm just trying to think of what I'm trying to say. But I guess for a little bit of a background, my dad started to struggle with mental health issues when I was really young. So my 2 older siblings, when they were younger, had a little bit of I don't want to say normal, but a more like father-daughter, father-son relationship with him than me and my twin brother did when we were little, because he was still doing okay when they were younger. And then once we were born, I think after maybe a couple of years, he started to have more and more mental health struggles. So we didn't really have as much of a relationship. He wasn't as present emotionally. He was there physically, but we just didn't really have a strong relationship or interact with each other often. He was kind of just there. And that's kind of how it was growing up. I mean, I remember like a little bit when we were younger, occasionally, like he'd take us out to go eat and stuff like that. But I didn't really know my dad super well. Like I didn't know what he really liked to do that much. I didn't know what he did for work. I didn't know any of that stuff. And it kind of escalated a little bit more when I got older because especially like in high school, I became more aware of kind of like what was going on in my life and began noticing things that were still kind of confusing to me and I didn't understand. And I know I'm being super vague, but it's kind of just like hard to put in words still. But so my dad has depression and some other things, and he is antisocial as well. So he doesn't really have conversations with people very easily. He's kind of quiet and just like kind of stands around. And this was something that my friends would notice a lot when I first moved to a new school district and they would meet my dad. They'd say, like, oh, your dad's really quiet, or like he doesn't talk much. He's kind of strange. And that I think is partially part of the reason we had a strained relationship as well, is because he had a harder time interacting with people in the public. Um, I Sorry, this is just like, ooh, I've never talked about it really, besides like talking to a therapist about it. So it's kind of just like hard to find words. So this podcast might be all over the place. But I was always closer to my mom. My mom was more involved with, like, she would go to our doctor's appointments with us. She would come to our sporting events. She was always super talkative. She still is super talkative. So she makes friends super easily. She'll talk to everybody and anyone, and everybody knows my mom because of that. So already there's a very different side of both my parents, where one is super talkative and outgoing and the other is very quiet and doesn't really go out and do things much. He spent a lot of time with his family and a lot of time at home. And I would try to have conversations with him, try to talk to him a little bit. For example, like when he was in our house watching sports, I would try to go up to him and talk to him about the sports that he was watching, but he didn't really seem like he wanted to talk much to me about it. I don't know if he just had a hard time with expressing his emotions or coming up with conversation points. But I always felt like I just wasn't really wanted to have a conversation. So I stopped trying for a long time. Like, he was just there. I would talk to him when I needed something, or like occasionally, like, I needed to drive somewhere, random small talk. But we never really had like a deep relationship and talked about our emotions or anything like that. Like, we were never super bonded in that way. And I think that there was always um, kind of a disconnect in some ways. So, to preface this as well, I didn't really know that my dad had mental health issues, like diagnosed specifically, until about sophomore, junior year of high school. So before that, I just knew that like he just sat around on the couch a lot. He went to his family's house a lot. We didn't really talk a lot, and he was on disability, so he wasn't working. And I didn't really know why. I didn't know the details. I always felt like there was like stuff going on that other people in my family knew about that I wasn't clued in on. And I think that as well was like a little bit of a disconnect, as well as my parents fought a lot. And I think that it was hard on my mom because she had to fill in a lot of ways for things that my dad wasn't doing. Like, she would clean, she would do the laundry, she would make us dinner, she would go to our appointments, she would go to our games, and all this stuff. And I know my dad was struggling a lot with his mental health and was depressed a lot. So I can't say what was going on in his head. But from my perspective, he was there, but not really there. So my mom always seemed to be more involved in our life. And my dad would get frustrated over small things, and get angry quickly. It was never like a violent anger, but verbally emotionally, it was scary. And I continue to go back and forth on this, and the reason why I blame myself a lot for things is because I know, like, to a degree in my head, that he was struggling, and a lot of the stuff that he was experiencing, I don't know if he knew that he was doing it. And I know that he was going through a hard time. So, like, I give him the benefit of the doubt in some ways, and I blame myself in some ways because I feel like I should have been more aware of what was going on and been there to support him and his mental health. But I was only a kid. I was 15. I didn't know what was going on. We didn't talk about mental health in my family. It was a very hush-hush topic. We didn't really talk about our emotions. Our family wasn't really affectionate. We didn't say, like, I love you. We never said, oh, I'm proud of you. Any of that stuff. We were kind of just all there. And, like, deep down, I think we knew we all loved each other, but it wasn't, like, a thing that we talked about a lot. And it came to a point in high school where that's kind of how it consisted. We didn't really have a relationship. We talked about, like, baseline things, but not really in depth. My parents fought all the time. I had kind of a anger toward my dad in some ways because he didn't do things that I felt like other kids' dads would do for them. And he wasn't super present, and I felt anger towards him as well because I felt like my mom had to fill in a lot for things that my dad wasn't doing as a parent should. And I took a long time to figure out with therapy that, you know, it's not my responsibility to try to have a relationship with my parent. Growing up, that was something that my parents should have done. They should have interacted with me more. They should have tried more on their end, and it's not my fault that he wasn't emotionally available to me growing up. And it's hard because, like, I know to a degree, like, that's not his fault necessarily because he struggled with mental health issues. So I don't know if that was, like, intentional or not. And I think that's also what makes it hard, is that a lot of the things in our relationship, I just couldn't tell what was real or intentional and what was unintentional. And I know that this probably is not making any sense, but if you have gone through an experience with this with your family or, like, someone in your life, you know it's kind of complicated and it's hard to talk about and it's very vulnerable. Okay. So I don't even know, like, where I want to go for this. I don't know what I'm even talking about right now. So this is kind of a mess. But I held a lot of anger toward my dad because of those things, especially to the point of right after my graduation, my parents were getting a divorce, which I was not upset that they were getting a divorce. That is completely fine. They did not love each other. They shouldn't have been together. But what was hard was that it felt like my dad didn't really care what was going to happen to me or Corey, especially because we were just going to leave for college and they wanted to sell the house, but they didn't have money to buy another house. So that's kind of what led into us having to live with all different friends and family, and be kind of, like, separated as a family. And I definitely held resentment toward him about that. And I found it really hard to come home before they sold the house, and look at him in the eyes and not feel anger toward him, because a lot of the financial strain was tied to him. And a big reason why we ended up in that situation. And I've talked to him about all this stuff, so like this isn't a surprise for him, and I know that he listens to my podcast. So it's never like anything ill will against him. And I wish him the best, but I'm just trying to share my side of things so people understand more about why I am the way I am. And yeah, so going into college then, I didn't talk to my dad at all. I completely stopped talking to my dad. I was really hurt. I felt very abandoned. And I felt like my parent wasn't doing what a parent should do for their kids. And because of that, I stopped having conversations with him. And I didn't tell him anything about, he knew where I was going to college, but he didn't know where I lived. He didn't come in to move me into college or anything like that. And it wasn't until, I think, junior year of college that I started to feel really guilty for not talking to my dad anymore. And I became fearful that he was going to harm himself because he was lonely or his kids didn't talk to him. And that led me to try to start talking to my dad again. And when we first started, it was very baseline conversation. Because every time I tried to tell him that I needed to talk about our childhood, I needed to talk about these things that happened growing up and the things that he did, and he didn't want to talk about it. He said it was in the past and that we had to just move on, and if we were going to have a relationship, we had to start new and not talk about the past. And I couldn't let it go, because I can forgive somebody, but I can't forget, and I need to talk about things that happened if I'm going to have a relationship with someone and be able to trust them. So that was how our relationship was for a good period of time in college. There was quite a few back and forth moments of me trying to have these conversations with my dad, him not really accepting these conversations or wanting to have these conversations. And there was just like very immature behavior with the things that he would text my siblings and my mom and me, that I didn't feel like he was listening to what I needed him to do in order to have a relationship with him. And I did try again talking to him in person about everything, and it was a little bit better. He acknowledged some of the stuff that he did for the first time, but it was hard to explain. But at that point, my dad kind of felt like a stranger to me. He just felt like a man that was biologically related to me, but not really a father. And when you have a dad that's demanding respect from you and your kids, not my kids, his kids, because he's their father, but doesn't really do or fill in the role of what a father should do, it makes it really hard to respect them, because they need to earn your respect and your trust, and a lot of that was broken. And I just had a really hard time setting boundaries because I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. It's your dad. Everybody wants a relationship with their dad. And I was trying to get to a point where we could get there. But he just wasn't able to have the conversations that I needed to have or set the boundaries that I needed him to have in order to have a relationship. And there's just a lot of other things going on that I'm not going to get into right now specifically that were very hurtful. And I decided, because I wasn't really talking to him at this point, because after I had this conversation with him, things were okay for a minute, and then he started to do things, text things to my siblings that completely went against what I told him and talked to him about, and he said he understood. And when I tried to have a conversation with him about it, he told me that I was too sentimental and that I just needed more time to move on. So because of that, I decided, okay, I can't do this anymore. I've been going through this constant cycle of up and down, crying all the time because of all these things happening and trying to be the mature one in the relationship. And I just needed a break. I needed to focus on myself because there was a lot of other things going on in my life. I was graduating nursing school. I was trying to apply for jobs. I was looking for apartments. I was planning a wedding. And I just couldn't handle another thing on my plate. So I decided, I'm going to go to therapy at college and I'm going to have conversations with them about this. And that's kind of when I started to learn about little T trauma and ways to cope with my anxiety and about not blaming myself for my relationship with my dad, because I had put in the effort to try and have conversations that he wasn't open to having with me. And learning that it was okay to set boundaries in a relationship, and that if he wanted a relationship with me, he would respect those boundaries. So at that point, he was not invited to my graduation. He didn't come. He texted us a couple days later saying that he wanted us off of his phone bill within 2 days. Basically in the same text of saying how disappointed he was in us that he wasn't invited to our graduation. And he wasn't invited to my wedding. I didn't give him any information about that. And then he sent me a text basically giving all the details of my wedding and threatening to come. So that kind of even more severed the relationship for me, because there was things that he would do in the past that I'm not going to talk about that made that threat pretty convincing that it would happen. And I just needed a break at that point. I was like, I have tried multiple times to have these conversations with you. You don't want to have them with me. You're being immature about this relationship. And I needed to focus on myself and focus on my health. And there was things that there was things that I had talked to my therapist about senior year of college, of reasons why I wanted to talk to my dad. And one of those was because I had an irrational fear that my dad was going to try to commit suicide because he was lonely. And at this point, he was remarried. He had I guess not remarried yet, but he was engaged and he had step kids and all that. So he wasn't alone and he had his family. But in my head, I was blaming myself for wanting to set boundaries between someone that was really hurting me, that I was going to be the cause of something like this. And recently, I didn't have any conversations with him in the past year and a half, basically. I changed my phone number. He didn't have my contact information at all. And he had a suicide attempt recently where he went inpatient after, and he is getting treatment outpatient now and all that kind of stuff. And it was like my worst fear that I always thought was irrational came true. And I know that it's not my fault. And, you can't blame yourself for those things. But I never want him to feel like that or go through that experience. And I did end up writing him a letter and mailing it to him with a blanket and stuff like that, just because I know what it's like to be depressed and suicidal, and I don't wish that upon anybody, no matter what. And I have no ill will for him at all. I want him to be happy, and I respect that he has been giving me my space, and I told him that. And I am at the point now where I don't know what our relationship might look like in the future. I don't know if we'll have a relationship. But it's scary to go back to that place, because I just don't want to get in this cycle again of getting hurt. And it's hard to trust someone when a parent is supposed to be the one that you can trust the most to take care of you, and they've hurt you so many times. It's hard to know what the right decision is for you, and if you should, have, I know it's never gonna be like a father-daughter relationship in that way with him, or at least wouldn't be for a very long time. There would have to be a lot of boundaries, and if he can't accept those boundaries, then I can't have a relationship with him. And that's just something that I still struggle with a lot, is knowing how to put boundaries in place and knowing that I am allowed to set boundaries, and that if someone wants to have a relationship with you, they will respect the boundaries that you're putting in place. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and it's hard to talk about because I don't really know what the future looks like for that. And obviously I did not go into any detail much at all on this podcast. It was just hard to talk about, and I honestly don't even know if this will be posted, because I don't know if this is helpful for anybody else or if anybody else is even going through this. But I know what it's like to have a strained relationship with a parent, and I know people have certain opinions that, it's your parent, you should talk to your parent because it's your dad. But you also have to protect yourself and protect your family. And I'm one of those people where if you are going to have a relationship with me, you have to respect the people in my family. And if you are not showing respect to the people in my family, then you are not respecting me. And that doesn't mean that you have to be buddy-buddy. That doesn't mean that you have to hang out with them all the time. But just don't send them mean, immature, irresponsible messages or treat them poorly as they are your kids. I don't even know if I'm going to post this. I might have to re-record another podcast episode because this is not planned, and I don't know if this makes any sense, and it's very fresh. But yeah, I think I'm just going to end the podcast here, and I know this isn't like the most upbeat podcast, but I'm just trying to be real and raw and let other people know that if you're going through this, you're not alone. Other people are going through the same thing, and it's really common. And the reason I'm sharing it is because a lot of people wouldn't talk about this. And a lot of people feel very alone because people don't talk about this. And again, I'm saying I don't wish anything bad against him at all. I have no idea what our relationship will look like in the future. This is just where we're at right now. And I don't know. I guess I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But next week, we have a really awesome guest on the podcast to talk about her experience with eating disorder. And she is a registered dietitian now, so kind of how she got into that and the content that she creates. And I think that will be really helpful for a lot of you, because I know that is a super common thing that people struggle with. So I'm really excited to have that conversation with her. And we have some good guests coming up in the next month, so I'm really excited for that, and trying to just be positive this year and really focus on protecting myself, but also being there to support other people and sharing my experience purely to help other people. I would not be telling you guys all of my secrets for no reason. So this is like, I am putting, what's the word? I want you guys to not feel alone, basically. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this podcast. Next week will be more organized. Like I said, this wasn't planned. But go ahead and leave the podcast a 5-star review. I really appreciate the support. And if you don't know how to do that, go to the profile page, hit the 3 dots, and rate show 5 stars. So I hope that everybody has a fantastic week, and I hope that you tune in next week for next week's video, because it's going to be really great. And I hope that this was relatable for someone, even if it's just one person. So I love you guys. Bye.